Good evening and welcome to this working session of the Lakeville Area Schools Board of Education. For attendance purposes, we'll go around the room. Everybody introduce yourself and say your role. Make sure you speak loudly and clearly so that the microphones can pick you up. Kim Baker, Chair.
David Anderson, Vice Chair.
Okay.
Carrie Lynn, School Board.
Bree Shinley, School Board.
Judy Kelleher, Board of Education.
Bill Holmgren, Executive Director of Business Services.
Dave Haveman, Executive Director of Student Services.
Carly Anderson, Board of Education.
Doug Van Zyl, Superintendent.
Emily McDonald, Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you. So for our discussion tonight, we are going to be talking about the attendance area adjustment process. And Dr. Van Zyl asked to just kind of update the board on that process and the model so that we can answer any questions before we start talking about final decisions for that.
Yeah, so basically what we wanted to do, Dr. McDonald's going to do kind of most of the presentation, and I'll chime in along the way. Basically, we wanted to make sure we went through the attendance area design process, kind of reviewed that with you as far as what's happened. You'll see on there the different concepts that have been put in place. You'll see the process that we've gone through. You'll see the design team, a lot of different things, but we just felt like it'd be better to try to give you the education of what's going on, even though Ray has kind of been here, talked to you about the process. Now that we've had a month or two working through it, you can actually kind of see the process in black and white. It's not the final process. It's not, you're not seeing a different concept or different model tonight. You're seeing all the process that we went through, and Dr. McDonald kind of explained that as we go along. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Wonderful. Yes.
Before you get started, I just want to make sure for attendance, Brian Thompson just walked in so that we have him present. Sorry.
Perfect. No problem at all. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share with you a little bit about our attendance area adjustment process. I know that many of you, if not all of you that are at this table, have been significantly involved in terms of participation, engagement around this process already, but as Dr. Van Zyl said, what we'd really like to do tonight is review our work to date and then talk about our next steps as we're getting closer to sort of February 27th, which was our target date to bring you some recommendations to the board. So I'll start with our agenda. We have quite a number of items. Because none of this information is really new to you, we'll kind of go through a little bit quickly, but please, if you have questions for myself or Dr. Van Zyl, please don't hesitate to stop and ask. So I do always like to kick it off with an acknowledgement and a thank you. We've had significant numbers of our stakeholders and leaders and school board members highly involved in this process to date. It takes time out of our busy schedules and it's important work, and so we just appreciate you as a school board. We appreciate our design team and our input team, which also includes our community. In particular, our communications team, which has done a really good job of making sure that people are aware of opportunities to provide feedback and input. And Tracy Brovold and her team have really taken on a lot of the modeling, Douglas Nino in particular, who is brilliant, and we are lucky to have him as a data analyst in our district. And then finally, you'll see as we get towards the end of the presentation that we've had a significant amount of public feedback. In fact, in talking with Ray last Friday, he said it's been to the degree that he hasn't seen and experienced before, and so that's really good. That means that we're reaching people, that they know what's going on, and they feel compelled to help us in this process, so that's really good. Basically, our key messages around this is that we really wanted to have this be an open, transparent, and engaging process. So how do we engage the largest number of stakeholders and help move the process forward so at the end of the day we can come out with the best product we can, given that boundary adjustments are a difficult undertaking, both for the district as well as for individuals that may be impacted by that change. You can see that we have the design team really has led revision based on feedback throughout the process, and so you'll see that throughout. And then our input team has also provided feedback on those models so that we can hopefully get to a better outcome at the end. So we have, as you know, sort of three different reasons why we have undertaken this boundary adjustment work at this time. The first one is because we will be opening Highview in the fall, which is really exciting. We'll not only provide some relief to our other buildings, but also will be a great addition to our system. We needed to address capacity issues as well as some socioeconomic disparities that we were seeing across the district. So that you'll see that also was on our guiding change document. And then finally, the last thing is we are looking forward to trying to manage to the best of our ability our middle school capacities. Right now, we know that we have one building that is extremely full. We have one building that is almost there, and then one building that's not quite as full. So we're trying to figure out how to best balance that to give us enough time to be able to fully plan forward in terms of what we need to do to address that capacity at the middle level. And then there was our proposed timeline. We started this project in 2023 in the fall, and our plan is to be done in February of 2024, so this month. You've seen these before, so I will just touch on them briefly. Our guiding change document, that was a document that really outlines like our why and our what. So when we're looking at different boundary scenarios, what are the things that we want to be paying attention to? And what are the things that are absolutely no-goes off the table? So we come back to that as a design team every time we meet to say, okay, here's the feedback, here's the guiding change, what do we need to tweak or change or do differently to try to better meet the guiding change document and try to address some of the feedback that we've received. You know the decision-making process, you'll see that in just a minute again. And then the whole system view, the thing that's important about that is understanding the history, understanding the context in which we're making these decisions. You know, things do change over time. Our community has changed greatly over time. And so it's really paying attention to those things that are happening external to the district that might impact the decisions that we're making. And we also look at not only the external items, but also the internal ones as well that might impact our decision making. You know that we've used Teamworks. I already spoke to the guiding change document. That was initially drafted by the administration, brought to the board for refinement, and then approved by the school board. So that's been the core document of our work. We have our design team. You'll see that list of people in a minute. It's about 20 to 25. And we are responsible for coming together, building a model, and then putting that out there for feedback. And then once the feedback comes back, adjusting those models and then bringing another model forward. Our input team, parents and staff, that's about 40 people, as you know, and they are really there to provide feedback into the design team's concept. We've been calling them models. They're really concepts in terms of what we want to do with boundaries. And again, that's we've tried to engage as many stakeholders as we can in that process as well. And of course, in addition to that, we open those meetings to the public so they can come and listen and then be able to provide feedback online, which has been really good. We've had a high level of success in that area. So you can see that input, I already talked about that. We have been very strategic in terms of how and when and what we're communicating to make sure that we're bringing our community along with us as we go through each stage of the boundary adjustment process. We call that down and in and up and out communication. So how do we make sure that our internal people are engaged and involved and informed, and then how do we make sure that beyond that in our school board, our public, our community is also. So we're always thinking of it from two different vantage points. This is just the Teamworks. You've seen this before. Talks about the guiding change, and really I'll just go straight to it because the guiding change, as I mentioned earlier, really addresses where are we currently and what is our desired result. Now, in between that, we have to always be considering what are the things that are off the table. So you can see one of them, for example, is we can't knowingly violate any law, policy, or agreement. Okay, so that's clear. Bus routes has been a conversation throughout this process, and so you can see that we don't want to have any bus routes longer than an hour, that we feel like that is off the table. So moving children from one end of the district to the other. So again, we come back to this as we continue to do our work. In terms of decision-making, obviously the school board is in the middle. They are the choice makers. You are the choice makers. And so your role in this process will be to vote yay or nay, right, on a model that or several models that we will bring forward to you to make the decision around. One of the things that I think is important to note is that what's good about working through a process of a design team and an input team is that you have independent information coming to you as a school board, right? So you get to make a decision based on the work of other people, based on input and feedback from a wide variety of people. And then we'll get to the bottom part a little bit later once we have solidified our actual boundaries. One thing that I know Doug has spoken to on a number of occasions, and I can't stress this enough, is this will create change and this will be difficult for some. And as a result, we're already sort of thinking about how do we help families make those transitions, students feel welcome, what kind of events, activities, what do we need to do to start building community in those buildings so that our families and our students feel comfortable on the first day of school. It doesn't start the first day of school. It starts well before the first day of school. So we're talking and thinking about that. And then, once you do boundaries, there won't be much refinement to that until we are put in a situation where we would be maximizing capacity or we would need to do something else from a facility standpoint. But those are important pieces to this process. Whoop. Oh, there we go. So you can see who plays which role. The input team is on the left-hand side, the design team is on the right-hand side, and then the choice maker, which is the board, is in the middle. I talked about the systems view. You can see the types of things that we're considering or thinking about when we're making these boundary adjustments. So essentially that is what is impacting us and our organization at this time, whether internal or external. What are the things we can lean on? What are the things that we need to be considerate of as we're moving forward? Here's the design team. We really, in terms of the principals, we have half of the principals on the design team and the other half are represented on the input team. So each principal has a role. Obviously, you can see that depending on where they are principals, they are impacted more or less based on their location. So obviously, Cherry View, will have a big impact because that's where Highview is and that's where the growth is. So, and then we tried to get a wide variety of other leaders to the table besides the executive team and the superintendent. We wanted to make sure that we had representation from Schmitty and Sons, and they have been amazing partners with us in this work. And to have them at the table and be able to say, nope, that's not going to work, that's going to be more than an hour, or that's going to require you to go by 2 other schools to get to. They just have a really important voice in this process, and so that's been really good. I was talking to a couple of community members, parents at the last input meeting, and I shared with them that they were asking a question about transportation and how we were considering that, and I shared with them that we had representation there from our bus company, and they were happy to hear that because, again, they play a key role in our district. We have met 9 times. I think when I'm a little embarrassed to say that I think when I reached out to the principals on the onset, I said, well, we're going to have 3 meetings. Now we have had 9. Well, the 9th one is this week. But it has been really good, and you can see sort of what has happened at each one of those meetings. The first meeting really was just to orient the group on the charge, make sure they understood the guiding change document. And then it was looking at models, developing models, getting feedback, and then taking that feedback and iterating and sending the next models out. So we have our next meeting on the 9th, or on the 8th. And in that meeting, we will be taking the feedback from our last input team meeting, as well as from the community feedback. And then also we did some outreach efforts. So we had some feedback from some communities that were challenged to either didn't have access to internet or didn't have transportation to attend. So we did some outreach there. So we'll bring all of that back to that 8th meeting to look at what's next in terms of how we iterate. All right. There's our input team membership, 40 members in total. We have a really nice representation, elementary, middle, and high. Again, I noted the principals are also on that group. We've had 2 input meetings, as you know, open to the community. We did have about 40 people, we had 80 people, is that right? 80 people at our first meeting, and then 40 at our second one. I think what was really nice for those that chose to attend was that we provided access to the maps to them. They could ask questions from the design team members. We weren't there to participate because we're the design team. We don't participate in the input team meetings at all. They do their own work, independent of us. But I know that everyone that was there at some point was engaging with a parent or community member around this work. So that was really good, that we were available to be able to answer questions and that the community was able to be involved. So I think that this is telling. In round 1, we had about 600 submissions to our first 2 concepts, and that was over 3,700 comments, which is significant. What we saw after this last round was that we had 1,300 submissions, so we more than doubled that in terms of engagement, and we had 2,100 open-ended comments. What that suggests to me is that we did a really good job of communicating the opportunity to provide feedback to families. So maybe, people get busy, and maybe if they didn't catch it the first time, we really tried to put enough information out there to encourage people to participate in round 2, which we had. I don't really need to spend much time talking about our current boundaries. You're well aware of where they are. We like to refer to it as a patchwork quilt. So when we kicked it off, we started with our first models. And again, you've seen these are on our website. We've documented all of the process on the website. So people can go and look at the models if they want to, just see where we've come from and where we've been. These are the very first models, elementary to middle feeder, and then middle to high feeder. And then based on that, this was model 2A. So you can see the elementary boundaries starting to take shape a little bit. Oh.
That's right, that's the.
There it is, yep. It's just moving in the middle there, in case, yep. And then here's the middle school model, and then here's our input. I do want to start with some strengths, but I also will say people had very strong feelings about our first 2 models. They were not very desirable for a lot of reasons, which is why you do this process, right? You can see that number 1, we're meeting our goal of trying to accommodate Highview. It seemed logical to a lot of people in terms of how we approached it. It would lessen the overcrowding and good use of bus routes. So those were some key things in our strengths. You can see the concerns, the displacement of students, relationships with teachers. That concern naturally, and as you would expect, does continue throughout every model. So, and that's understandable. We understand that. There were specific concerns from some neighborhoods. It was related to splitting of neighborhoods, where the lines exactly were drawn, those types of things, bus ride length, diversity at Highview. I'll say that to that point, we have tried over the course of our iterations to make sure that to try to have as best of a balance as we can at Highview. One of our challenges there, just so you're aware, is where it's located. And we're certainly not going to bus students from one end of the district to the other to have it be a more diverse school. So that's a little bit of a challenge for us, but we've done some modeling that increases that. So we're taking a look at that. Yes.
I think on those first models too, I think one of the main differences is that we really tried to follow main roads that, Dodge, Cedar, main highways is part of it because it just seemed to be a natural break. And then I think that's what led to more specific concerns about certain neighborhoods or certain areas being divided because the road may split a neighborhood or somebody feels like it was splitting a neighborhood. But I think that was one of the main focuses of the design team the first time around was to try to use those main roads, main dividers as boundaries.
Yeah, we really needed a place to start.
Well, I was gonna say, is it fair to say that you started with a lot of data and then the first round of input kind of tossed in the nuances and the nuances were then corrected with the second round because it was less about the data then and more about where communities really reside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that from my perspective, what really went on those early design team meetings was that we were trying to stick as closely as we could, and we did continue to do that as well, but to that guiding change. So we weren't really, and the numbers. So all we were doing is looking at, because we knew it was our first concept, so we were looking at the guiding change document and we were looking at the numbers, and then as Doug said, our place to start was let's go down the main roads, look at the numbers, and we're like, well, the numbers look pretty good, right? That's why you bring that then to the input team and you get public feedback for them to say, wait a minute, here's the nuance, this is one neighborhood, you've now split it in half. So that type of feedback was really good. We did come at it from sort of as unbiased of a place as we could just to get the first models out and get some reaction to that. So here's some areas for improvement. I don't think we were quite aware at the time that we did have at least one elementary school that was split to 3 middle schools because we were so focused on the elementary at the time. And so obviously people were unhappy with that. So that was something that we definitely worked on over time.
Can I ask one clarifying
Sure.
question? When you talk about the patchwork model of where we are currently, how, and I'm sure this is a little bit of process, but did that get there through additional neighborhoods having to go to because one thing I want to be mindful of is just not getting to something patchwork again.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like, how did it get to that?
It got to that because we were growing so quickly that we had to figure out where the students were going to go. So like when they were building new neighborhoods, we have to decide if there are children in these homes, where are they going to go? And so what we had to do was say, well, there's space here and there's space here. And then we did some additions, but we only did them on a few buildings. So then it was like, well, this building has space and this building has space. And so Tracy and her team were really put in a difficult spot of, all right, this neighborhood's coming online, they're going to go here. And in some cases, they passed other schools.
Right.
At least a school to get there. Yes.
It was to
A
keep
good example
moving
of-
students at that time.
Yes.
So instead of continually moving students, it was just taking new neighborhoods that were being onboarded and placing them in schools that had space.
Yeah, that's I feel like an important clarifying point is how we got to that.
Yeah.
I mean, we are going to continue to grow, so some of that obviously you guys are thinking about, but just wanting to make sure that that's how that happened as opposed to.
A good example of it is Lakeview. 3 years ago, it was a square. But because new neighborhoods came up in the northeast, there are some pockets, islands of new neighborhoods that are going to Lakeview because they had the room.
Yeah,
And that's why you had to split between 3 middle schools.
right.
But I think they worked on that one, so. But it's a small area, but they had to put them somewhere, and all those buildings were filled. So they became pockets of, and I'm sure that happened in other buildings too.
Yeah, if you look at the model, you'll see the way we sit now, there's multiple buildings that have that. And It worked. It didn't have to do a major overhaul of boundaries for 10 or 12 years, since maybe 15, since the district's had some major boundaries, but it also impacts a larger number of students now because there are pockets all over the place that now have to be brought back into alignment.
Yep.
And we
I
did
do,
that.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Terry.
We did that because as new neighborhoods are coming online, the district said, before the first house is built, this neighborhood's gonna go here, so the parents know it, even though they might have been next door to a building that was already full.
It's
So
like
they were,
patching.
yeah, that's what it was.
You know?
Yes, and I do want to reiterate one thing that was said, actually, I think it was said by a couple people. Our sort of strategic thinking around that process was we didn't want to have to move children multiple times. And so we knew that at some point, in the near future, we were going to have to address the boundaries in a more significant way, especially with the elementary school that was finally approved by the community. And so we tried to minimize that by identifying the schools before the students were there. So then when we did the boundaries, we'd do it one time, and that would be the disruption instead of multiple times. So thank you for that, Carly. Appreciate it.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, please interrupt me. So our next two models were D2, E2. Those were the most recent models that just came to the input team. You can see D2 here. That was the first model that we put forward for the elementary, and there's E2. So you can see some variation in those two models that were brought to the next meeting. And then here's the middle school, that's D2. And then E2, not as significant changes. One of the things in these models is the McGuire boundaries pretty much stayed the same. So that was less student movement there. There was some movement more on the north end, which is, of course, where a lot of our building is happening right now, too. Input round 2. So there's a significant amount of input, as I told you. I would say that from my perspective, that the sort of overarching, there's a lot of themes. I would say in categorizing those themes, there are themes around disruption in care of the child and the change. There are a number of items up there that speak to that specifically. I would say also that there was sort of a focus on programs and consistency. And so how do we, if we're going to go through this process, how do we stabilize to the best that we can? You can see the special education. There was also conversations around Ignite and other programs. So how do we make sure that we are providing the appropriate space so we don't have to be moving students in the future? Those are probably the two main ones. The third one is that there was a number of items around influence and transparency. I think that has improved over time. I know that this was our second meeting, but as we have continued to try to communicate and put information out to the public, I think that has been helpful.
Can I say, as far as the process though, when at the second input meeting, there was a lot of positive comments about the process, that people liked and thought the process was very good.
Yeah, so I spoke to a number of parents at the first input meeting and then the same parents at the second input meeting. And to your point, Judy, one of the things that I heard was I think coming in initially, there was a sense that this was it. Model 1 was the model. This is what we're going with. And so I think once people realized that they had opportunities for feedback and then that feedback would be addressed, we can't always obviously make a change based on every piece of feedback because it doesn't always work. But we talk about all of those things in our meetings and try to do what we can to make the appropriate adjustments.
But I do think that probably some of the response is the visual, because you're right. I mean, when I looked at the first models, it's so clean, you know, and looks very fair. I don't mean to say fair, but like, it just looks like it makes a lot of sense. And so I think when people see cuts into that, then they start to wonder, well, to speaking to your mention of like influence or that kind of thing, it's like, who's saying what to get their neighborhood where they want, like, and whether or not that's the process, I think that can be the public perception, is just seeing that very clean model change to something that looks
There's
more.
like these little,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and I think that we have to recognize and acknowledge that the role of a parent or guardian or family member that's caring for a student in our district, their role is to advocate for what they believe is best for their child or the child that they are caring for, right? So it's not unexpected. You would expect that people would come forward and provide feedback that aligns with what they feel like is best for their child. So I think that a lot of times, I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as an opportunity for engagement and to listen. And the reality is that we've made a significant number of changes based on people's feedback, whether that's from the input team or from the online feedback or whatever. Like, that's been a really important part of that process.
I think the other thing, as you look at the maps, hopefully you realize you could take one little pocket of our community and there may be 50 kids in that pocket. You take the same size someplace else and there could be 200 kids. Or you could take a large area and there's like, 5 or none.
Yeah.
You know, but they may develop. So that changes how you deal with the capacity within the school. If you take something out, how do you put back in? And the same size area may not be the same size area that gets replaced. So that's why I think you go from a more clean looking model to a more jagged puzzle piece model. But it's all still trying to stay within the guiding principles and to try to keep our numbers as consistent. You're not going to have the exact same number of kids in every category that we look at, whether that's special education, free and reduced lunch, ethnicity, you know, across the board. But we did, I think the design team and the input team have tried to take those numbers into consideration to balance them as close. So we don't have a 950 student building and a 420 student building. Things are a little bit closer in those numbers.
I think we have another challenge too, and in a way it's kind of a good challenge. Nobody wants to leave their school.
No.
I mean, in some districts, people want to leave their schools, not here. So that's good news, but it makes it much harder.
I agree with you, Terry. We hear and have heard that a lot, and that's exactly what I was thinking too. Is, boy, it's just amazing that our families and kids feel so connected to our schools. Like, that is really a good thing.
Yep.
What's not a good thing is that, you know, we have to. But what I will say about that is, in thinking forward, that means that we have a lot of teachers, administrators, staff, everyone in the building who has figured out sort of the secret sauce to creating communities in their building, right? And so we have the information, we have the expertise we need to be able to do that again, replicate that, once our students know where they're going. So we're very fortunate that we have such amazing people in this district that they are, of course, ready to go and willing to do whatever they can to make sure that our kids and our staff, because we'll have some staff changes as well, do feel comfortable in those buildings. So next steps. So that's sort of where we are. Our design team meeting met last Thursday. We're going to meet this Thursday to finalize some models based on the rest of the input. We did do some of that at the first meeting, but we had some questions that we sent back. We needed to visualize some models before we could figure out if we needed to make any more changes to bring. And so you can see there the things that we focused on. We're looking at some opportunities for perhaps one more round of feedback related to maybe 2 models. We're not exactly sure how that's going to roll out yet. We are getting to a place where when we look at feedback and we move to Doug's point, one little piece, it throws everything out of whack, and then we move it back, and then we move another little piece, and that throws everything out of whack. So we're getting to a place where, in order to maintain sort of the contiguous boundaries, and to try to best align, and leave space in the areas where we know there will be future growth, I think we're getting pretty close. So that's where we are. We'll make some decisions on Thursday about what to bring forward, and then I think after that will be our board meeting on the 20th. Does that sound right, Doug?
There's a work session.
Work session.
And then the
think it's
official
the
board meeting
26th.
on the 27th.
Yeah, so we'll bring back those last models on the 20th. So you'll have a chance to review and peruse. We'll walk you through those, and then we'll go from there. So that's our plan. I do think that, we set up our timeline to make sure that it best aligned with our staffing process too. So I really feel grateful for our staff who has accommodated our schedule. So we have leaders and principals that are working at night and working on weekends and doing other things so that they can be with us for those design team meetings. And I really do appreciate that because they just feel really passionate about wanting to make sure that staff are honored in this process too, and that we don't put it off too long, so that people that want to maybe go to the new school have an opportunity to do that, and that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we're hiring late. So with that, I think I covered all that.
You did.
So you might not, I think it said for the input team, you might do that over email, or you said digitally, or you might have another input team meeting after. Like, we are getting into that. I think everybody probably agrees that we need to get this wrapped up right at this point.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about right now is that we do want one more sort of round of feedback, but we don't know that the input team, the in-person meetings that we've had before, necessarily will garner us what we need to make some decisions or to help you all make some decisions. So what we're looking at now is sort of testing just two models and saying, what do you like about these two models? And then that way we can, and you can have some data on the final two. We definitely want to get some input. We're just trying to work out exactly what that's going to look like.
How are we going to know which is the better model?
Well, I think what I can say is we won't be able to get it perfect. We won't be able to meet everybody's needs, desires, and also the guiding change. So what we have tried to do over time is to create the best models that we can, given the context. So what we'll do, Dave, is that when we bring those forward, we'll have some public input from the input team around which model that they prefer and why. And then we'll bring the pros and cons to the table and talk you through them. So, I mean, everything's going to have a con and everything's going to have a pro. And so I think that will be helpful to you. So we'll do that we'll bring that at the work session, talk through it.
And I guess I would also say, you're probably not going to see two hugely different models being presented to you. It's probably going to be, here's a model, here's a tweak to what that model looks like that may or may not address some of those other areas. Because as we're looking at comments, a lot of the comments, as Dr. McDonald shared, were about, well, this is how my child was impacted. Completely get it. That's how families have to look at it. We kind of have to step back and say, big picture as a whole, how does this play not only for our existing boundaries, but down the road, what makes sense as we continue to grow? Because at some point, we're going to have to adjust boundaries again, just being honest. Because we continue to grow by another 3,000-4,000 students as projected, we're going to be back doing some boundary adjustments again, and we really don't want to get to the puzzle piece scenario or pattern quilt that we're in right now to try to be able to address some of that. And to what Emily said, it's not going to be, hey, this is just the perfect plan. I think it's going to get us to different scenarios, because not everybody's going to agree that there's going to be one perfect plan. Otherwise, we could have put the first plan out there and said this is perfect and not made any adjustments. But I think you can see through the process, we've been able to tweak and adjust it and I think make it better.
And if I can add a couple of comments, Terry and I sat in on Meet and Confer, was that 2 weeks ago, last week?
Week and a half.
Week and a half.
And the concern that came from the Meet and Confer was to stay true to the timeline, because the staffing piece is extremely critical to them, and it was very tough when we went through budget adjustments to push staffing off. So they asked that we stay true to that timeline from a staffing perspective. And
It's going to affect every single elementary staffing.
yeah, but it also goes beyond the staffing. Our bus company too, just keep in mind that with bringing this new elementary online, they're having to redo routes, and which will also probably be, my guess is a few minutes tweak here or there to start times of elementaries and stuff like that. So they're gonna need that information as soon as our administration needs it from a staffing perspective. They're gonna need it from a routing perspective. So that'll be, the timeline's gonna be extremely critical to honor that. And then I attended both the input meetings, and I attended part of the design team meeting that they had last week. And just in hearing what I heard from the input meetings, and then when I was at the design meeting, hearing what they heard, there wasn't anything that got by their ears. So I think the input and the communications that they were having from the dialogues with people and reading the comments and stuff, everything has been taken into consideration. And the changes and stuff that I saw in talking with parents and looking at the numbers, it's about balance. It's about how to best balance our buildings, how best balance our student population and all of that. And just keeping in mind that ultimately that is educationally an improvement for all of our students too, from how they get serviced, supported, transported, and stuff. So, and if it's one thing that I think this district has always done very, very well, and we have lots of tenured teachers and staff members who have lived through the 90s and all those transitions, where we were transitioning kids every year or every other year for 10 years in a row. This district is extremely good at transitioning students and families and developing new communities. You know, I had kids that transferred several times, and it was like, you know, it was like neighborhoods didn't want to go to this school, and they went to that school, and then a few years later, they were moved out of that school, and they didn't want to move out of that school. I mean, it doesn't take long to build the community. So it's something that this district, I think, does very, very well and should be very proud of.
I think too that I've been involved in a lot of boundary changes
Yeah.
over the years. I mean, there was a time we had boundary changes every 2 years.
Every year in some cases.
Yeah. And to me, this one seems like we have a lot more community involvement and input than we had in the past. And had a lot more people and staff members and parents involved than we had in the past, which I think will turn out a good product.
Yep.
As a result of that.
Yep, I think it's been a great process, and like I said earlier, I think our community members have respected the process because of their being able to be, have the input.
Brian, you had your hand up. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation,
Yes,
appreciate it.
of course.
So I've got a couple things that I'd like to acknowledge and also just kind of call out from my observation. So number one, we put this guiding change document together back in October and haven't had a chance to revise it, look at it. This is our first meeting about how the process has been going and getting an update on it. And so I just want to be mindful that we haven't had much dialogue around what that future state vision is going to look like beyond the guiding change document that we had to sign off on back in October. And so just wanted to acknowledge that. A couple things that I did notice on your design team, there was about 23 folks on it, but I didn't see anyone from the city involved. So just curious what the city involvement has been in regards to data collection.
Cities.
Cities, data collection and other components. A couple things that I'll also share that I want to be mindful of is that as we gather the feedback from our community members, there is this, are they providing feedback around the current state or the future state? And when I say the future state, like we're building a model or ideally creating a boundary design that really should set the stage for the next 5, 10, maybe 15 years in certain pockets of our community. And so while I want to be, while we focus on the balance piece of it, but should we be really designing it for scale and for growth? And so when we gather the feedback from our stakeholders and our various community members, I would make an assumption they're not providing feedback around what our community is going to look like in 5 years, where our next middle school might be, and where the capacity ought to be, and so forth. And so those are just a few things that I just want to call out, because when we think about the design, when I think about the design that will be coming to us for review, I will be thinking about the future state. Does Lakeview Elementary, does McGuire, do they get maxed out at 90% capacity? So that in our 2023 strategic plan, the next thing that we need to build is a middle school. And so figuring out where that might be and where, if that gets built in the next 2-3 years, which elementary schools will be impacted. And so if we design a model in a current state, are we impacting all 9 elementary schools, or do we impact just a couple, assuming that they're going to be maxed out, and decreasing the capacity of other elementary schools so that those continue to stay as is. So those are just a few observations. Again, this is our first meeting getting an update of where things are at, but I just want to be mindful of current state, future state, guiding change document we haven't reviewed, city input, and then lastly, setting the stage for our community and our boundaries that we'll set for the next 5-10 years.
I have a couple of things, if you don't mind.
All right, ahead.
Number one, you've been asked all along if you have input to share. So you may not have gotten all together to have it, but you've been asked, hey, if you have thoughts or ideas, send that to the board president, send that to myself if you have thoughts or ideas, or put your comments into the document like everybody else would be able to do to revisit that. So that started from day one when Ray said, hey, if you have thoughts or ideas, here's how you can be involved in that process. As far as the city, I meet with Justin and Tom on a monthly basis. They are also like, hey, we have nothing to do with your boundaries, but we'll tell you where the pockets are of growth and development, but we can't tell you exactly when they're going to happen. That data comes from whatever is platted, gets pulled from the system that Teamworks uses. So they're looking at what they know is platted today. They don't know how long it's going to take to develop out because the economy may turn good or bad. And so that plays a role in how that may be developed future on. So the city is involved. I know the mayor's written an email. I've talked to Justin from Lakeville, but you also have to remember all of Lakeville's growth is not in Lakeville School District. Some of that growth takes place and is outside of our boundaries. Then you have Elko, New Market, Credit River, several other places that have growth, but they're different lot sizes. So you may say, hey, we're opening up 15 lots, but it may be 15 5-acre lots. Well, that's going to develop differently than lots within a smaller configuration. So they are involved in that process, but they'll also tell you, we're not telling you how your boundaries need to go. We're telling you where the growth and development. So they have been involved in that process as
For
well.
clarification, for those listening, just because that is a question that I get a lot from when I was at the input meeting, just people were asking what the city involvement was. Can you just clarify who Justin and Tom are with the city and what their
managers,
departments are?
City administrators,
Thank
city
you.
managers that
Thank you.
work with both of them.
Okay.
We meet with both of them. And then as far as trying to look forward, that question I think got asked at an input meeting of Ray as well from Teamworks. He said they do try to take that into consideration, but again, similar to what I said about the growth and development of an area, they can't project how long that's going to take moving forward. They have tried to, the design team I think has tried to also take a look at capacities. And people even from the input are like, well, some of these areas are landlocked. Maybe some of those schools have to have a few more students in it to start out with than some of these others that may have growth. So that has been taken into account to try to project forward. And then as far as where the next school, where those things, that's something that the facilities committee is working on and we'll be bringing to y'all shortly, because there's multiple layers into that, whether it's build new, whether it's add on, is it middle school, is it high school, is it, where exactly do you as a board feel those priorities fall? They're gonna provide their thoughts and ideas to you, but it still boils down to where you as a board want to go. And then it's probably at least 2 years, almost 3 years from when that happens to fruition. So they are trying to take those things into account, but that's why I'm also saying this is probably not the last boundary change, because I don't want people to think, hey, just change boundaries and there's not gonna be anything else. There's gonna have to be something else as we continue to grow. What do you add?
My comment on, it'd be great to plan for the future, but the issue might be, okay, we decide to build a middle school. Well, do we get land in Elko? Do we get land?
Let's put it on Ipava.
Yeah, put it in Pava. I mean, the point is, wherever you put it, it's going to affect boundaries differently. So you have to really have that property before you know where the boundaries are going to be.
Well, and if you do it, to Brian's point, you also want to take into account where some of that future growth going to be.
Right.
If you add on or build new, because you don't want to stick a school right in the middle of what we already have existing, when you know a majority of our growth is probably going to be on the periphery of our district and to the southern side of our district if things go the way they're projected to go. So to put something in Lakeville proper communities, the city, probably isn't where I would say that you're probably going to need to do something. If you're going to build something new later on, it probably needs to push outside of that boundary, because no offense, it's great property. I love where Highview's at, but it's probably not the best location for where that elementary school could have gone to, maybe for some future planning and growth, because it's really, you can hit a golf ball from Eastview to Highview, from Highview to Cherryview, from Cherry, you know, a lot of kids in that area, but they're very close, and that makes this boundary adjustment even more challenging, because there's no real good way to puzzle piece that out when you have them so close together. It'd be great if you could pick up a school and move it. That'd make this job a lot easier, but since they are where they are, that makes the challenge even more complicated, because there is so many overlaps, and there are different pockets in our community that have different demographics of communities, whether it's apartments, free and reduced lunch. Some of our Somali families live in certain areas because that's their community. They want to be around them. That changes things, and we want to be mindful of all those things. Emily, were you going to say something?
For example, even adding on to a building, you'd have to take all that into consideration too. Is that an area that's not going to grow? Why would you add on to it? You know, there's a lot of things to think about.
And you project it, but you don't know. Who would have told you in 2020 COVID would be in effect in a grinding halt, and this district would lose 300 students out of it when it was growing 200 or 300? You know, all it takes is one other tip of the teeter-totter, and you're right back to having some issues that throw all that stuff off of whack.
Well, I think the other thing to keep in mind is we're only, as a school district, we're only a third developed. So we've got 2/3 of our district yet to develop. So, you know, a 3-year or 5-year plan is a very short-term plan for this district. And, you know, a lot of people don't realize, because they see Lakeville getting built up, but there's so much more to our district beyond Lakeville, and there's a lot of room. And I don't know where we're still projected, but at one point we were projected to be like the 3rd or 4th largest district in the state. So there's still a lot of room for growth, and so, you know, we can try to plan ahead to do as much as possible to minimize that. But with the way we're going to continue to grow, we're still going to have to move kids. And it's going to kind of get back to those days in the 90s where, you know, we were building a lot more at that time and transitioning kids into new spaces. And it's a good thing.
Can I clarify something? When we have like the capacity piece on these documents, capacity, is that fire code? Is that optimal number of students in the building? What?
It's really based off of classrooms and what those classrooms could be used for. So if it's a full-size classroom, it counts as a capacity space. But we also have to take a look at what programming's in there. Like, for example, a special ed class. The programming in a full-size classroom is different. If you've got therapy swings and other things that takes up different spaces, so that impacts your capacity. So they did try to take a look at it from the vantage point of the programming that's taking place within those schools right now.
Well, Doug, we also explained it also has to do with the core, like the cafeteria, the gym spaces, and some of the core services.
Yeah, if you just add on to a building, you know, if you add a wing for another 200 kids, that doesn't mean your cafeteria can service another 200 kids, or you got enough gymnasiums. So they did try to take a look at the number of students that could be served by those ancillary facilities as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, when we say we're getting to 95% capacity in the school, is that okay, or is that?
No.
Like, what's optimal?
Yeah,
85?
no, really, when you get, normally, this is my experience, Bill can chime in because he works with facilities, or Emily as well, or anybody else. Normally, when you get to 85%, that would be kind of optimal capacity. You feel, you can still
You're
move
full.
around, you can still breathe, you start pushing above that 90%, you're feeling, wow, we're getting pretty full. 95%, you're like, where are we gonna go? You know, that's where some of our buildings are at now, where we've got classrooms in the library, tutoring in the hallways, things of that nature. They're at that 95, 100% because of the programming that's in our building. So really, if you can, 85% is really probably the optimal level, at least I've been told from the construction industry and from this
Architects.
utilization is where you want to be, that you're going to feel like, hey, this is manageable, this is doable. You start
Yeah.
moving above that, it gets tighter.
Well,
Yeah,
that's,
that's
I
what
think
we've
that's what I
always
want
used.
everybody to know too, listening, is it's not just, this isn't just a middle school problem. A lot of these, when you're looking at the models, I can't remember specifically, maybe 2 of them are sitting in the 80% range and the rest are 95 and above, right? So it feels, so I know you guys are doing your best to try to, and I can appreciate, you know, paying attention to the schools that are more landlocked and trying to up enrollment there, and also like there's just those neighborhood things that you're talking about. And
Yes, that is truly the balance, because I think Doug said at the beginning, you could move one little tiny piece and maybe there's 100 students in there, and now you've put a building at 97% capacity and the other one's now at, 70. So those are all the things that we're trying to weigh. And I appreciate, Brian, your questions, because it really speaks to when we talked earlier about the systems view. It's like understanding the context of what is going on in our environment. And the reality is that we have had explosive growth in this district. And then you layer on that, early on, some failed levies, significant cuts over a period of time, trying to get back on track, trying to make sure that we're being respectful of the tax tolerance of our community and all those pieces. Then you throw COVID in there. And I don't say that as an excuse. I say that to say that's a reality of our context that put us behind, which is why we had to start doing additions, and we had to look at an elementary school. So we're having those conversations at the table, those systems pieces, to the degree that we know and can anticipate. We want to make sure that they're taken into account so that we don't find ourselves in this exact same position again, or that we would have to start moving kids again until we make some kind of facilities change.
I mean,
I have a question. When would we be talking about facilities? I know the groups are meeting.
Yep, they're going to be finalizing that this month.
Okay.
So it should be coming to the end of this month, beginning of March.
Well, we can look at a 10-year plan, 5-year, what have we?
It's really probably a 5-year plan to start out with. They can project a little bit further, but it really depends on what the community feels they are willing to support, because there's going to be options from building a new middle school, adding on to existing middle schools, going into the high schools, taking some locker bays and making them in the classrooms, or adding wings. Then you haven't even talked about preschool or an elementary. Those have to happen again. So there's going to be multiple variables, and it all boils down to money. Because any of them, we've got about $50 million in no tax increase bonding capacity, but to do most of those is significantly above $50 million.
Yep, it is.
Brian?
yeah, I think that facilities update would be super crucial for me, just to have a better visibility of, I mean, I know that all the middle schools are, I think in all these designs are scheduled to be at 100% capacity or something like that. And I believe Kenwood Middle School was originally designed to be a high school or something.
Right.
And then,
It was.
It was
It was high school, sorry.
McGuire, wasn't
I
it?
went to Apple Valley, so.
McGuire was high school too.
Yeah, but I believe Kenwood has the capacity to add 10 extra classrooms and build that out. And so, while another middle school would be ideal, but it may take a few years for us to get there, does it make sense to build out those 10 extra classrooms, and then what does that do to your overall design? And so I think that we've got multiple things in parallel that need to be reviewed, discussed, and talked through. But I just want to be mindful of those additional aspects of it, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Good point.
So Emily, I just have a few questions related to timeline here to make sure that
Sure.
we help keep on that timeline. First of all, like your PowerPoint presentation, it had a lot of data about input and feedback that the community provided. Will that PowerPoint presentation be available to the board so we can kind
Absolutely.
of look through that? Okay, and so then you also said that you intend to do, there's a design team meeting this week, and that you intended to do like another input where you would gather some feedback. When will the board have access to that input so that we're ready for that working session that comes up on the 20th?
When will you have access prior to the 20th?
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that question. Obviously, depending on the feedback and how long
Right.
it takes to analyze it, obviously, we want to put it in your hands as soon as we can.
Correct.
Certainly, we could make it, we'll make it available to you before the meeting. I don't want to promise a date and not be able to deliver, because
Okay.
I'm a timely person. So I'll
I'm
look,
gonna hold you to
I'll
that.
look into
It
that.
also depends on the types of questions that we ask.
Right.
If we just leave it open-ended and you get 1,300 responses, it's harder to roll through 13 as compared to, do you like this plan? Do you like this plan? Which one's it? So
Right.
that's part of what the conversation has to be as far as what feedback we're going to be looking for. Because as Emily said, we're kind of getting to the point of, we could ask for all that, but
I think the guiding themes,
Yeah.
just like what you had on there, would be all that we would probably need as a board on what that feedback would be, just so that we have it in advance of that meeting, so we
Yep.
can look through it and kind of know.
For sure, and
to
our
prepare
plan,
for the
our plan
discussion.
really is to when we bring the models for the 20th meeting, to really talk through, what are the real strengths, or how do people feel about this model versus this model? That way you can be informed, before you have to make a decision. So we
Yep.
want to provide you as much information as we can that would be helpful for you
Thank you.
as you're thinking through this process. So I will get on, we'll certainly make sure that the PowerPoint is available. I didn't go through everything line by line. However, I think what you may have noticed or will notice when you take a deeper look is sort of those overarching themes that I talked about, a lot of individual, sort of personalized feelings, as well as, sort of the more like, if we're going to do this, then let's do it, and then let's be done with it. Which, of course, I understand. I mean, we are educators, so we're all heart people. So it is hard for us to know sometimes that we know it's going to be a disruption, and if we were in a different circumstances, we wouldn't want to do this, but it's what we have to do and what we need to do for the district and for the kids, to give them proper space to be able to do what they need to do, and the staff. But yes, so yes.
Thank you.
Can I clarify one more thing too, sorry? So I just don't want to waste more time reviewing models that probably aren't going to come forward to us. So is it the case that this next round would maybe produce 2 models that you really think are, or is it possible you bring one that's new and one that's really old, or do you not know any of that at this point? Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to.
Yeah, we don't, I can't, I don't know with 100% certainty, but we will bring 2 models forward that is sort of the best work and the best thinking of the input and the design team, and then addresses as much as we can possibly address in the feedback, as well as in the numbers and accounting for space and those types of things. So yeah, we will bring the best 2 models we have forward as part of the conversation.
And you'll be able to list the strengths and the
Yes.
challenges of each model.
Yes.
Good.
Go ahead.
Hey, is there a probability to get maybe a pre-read or a pre-draft of what that facilities plan might be on the 20th as well? I think for me, it'd be good to have some broader context around what the vision and where the plan is going to be. But that would be my
we
ask.
can get you what they've listed as the priorities
Okay.
right now. Right, they gave us basically their priorities. Now they've asked us to kind of clump together what would be a dollar amount and what they could get for that dollar amount. So we have the priorities, we can get that put together pretty easily for you. course, again, it's not finalized, that hasn't been approved, but we can give you the gist.
Because we
of
did
what
a
they've done.
2-year plan, 10-year plan a couple of years ago.
Oh, it was more than
I saw that.
Yeah, I've
It
asked,
was right when I was on the board.
I asked
Yeah.
Loeffler
It
for
was
that,
right
I've
when I was
asked
on
Wold
board.
for that, and they're like,
We went over it. It was like a 10-year.
yeah, and they would tell you that it kind of got sidetracked, because I've had that conversation. Bill and I have reached out to him, because there were some things that were on
Okay.
the, lower on that plan that kind of got moved up, and some
Okay.
things that were on top. So there was one that was done, I want to say it was 11 years ago, that they, that.
No, we got updated a couple of years ago.
Well, I think you got a presentation from the superintendent at that
Yeah.
particular time, but I don't think there was an official plan. At least I've gone back and tried to look, and Stephanie's pulled back into the archives.
Maybe there wasn't an official
I think-
plan. Maybe that
I
was.
think it was,
maybe
I
that
think it
a
was built off of
suggestion.
the last one that you were
Okay,
talking
there's
about.
Maybe that was-
So, but we have that as well.
But it would,
yeah.
so I agree, that would be good to
There
I
was
think
one that
Judy
was
and I
done
were
about
on that
6
thing.
years ago.
That was how long ago,
6
19?
6 years ago.
6 years ago?
Well,
Okay.
it would probably be best for the design team and the input team to have that information, right? Like, to be informed, because
Not-
you're the ones.
Not
driving-
necessarily,
Yeah, not
because again, it
necessarily.
depends on the planning of what you as a board want to bring forward and what the community is willing to vote for, because it's going to take a vote of the community.
Yeah.
So if something, they need to be aware, I think they all know that we have growth and development, and they know that we're going to be pushing certain different areas. But they've tried to take some of that into concept as they've talked about different areas, because there's some, you go all the way straight across from Lakeview to the west, to our western side of the boundary, that's still a fairly significant distance to travel by bus. But they're like, well, that may be an area that grows, because there's some areas plotted out there, but they're not scheduled to be fully developed for quite a while. That may be an area that either goes up to Orchard Lake or drops to a new school if a new school gets developed. So they do have those things in mind, but they can't really just say, well, here's how they're gonna chunk that out, because it's gonna really depend on how quickly some of those areas grow.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the point of like, if we were building in the south, that it would make sense to try to have more enrollment at our schools that are in the south currently, as opposed to. I mean,
Yeah, because you would, those would be the kiddos, because as we know, I think last year, Bill and I shared, we've got 400 elementary kiddos that are south of 70.
Yep.
And we got 90 kids that are open enroll into New Prague that are elementary school. So, that's basically the size of Orchard Lake for those number of kiddos. So, again, some of it boils down to knowing those numbers, but it's also what will the community support, because there's a larger number of people that live in Lakeville proper. They'll be like, well, why would I build a school down in there? My kid's not gonna go. So it's all about
Otherwise, our
communication,
school
helping
for
people understand that concept, because I think everybody wants what's best for all the kiddos, in my opinion, but it still takes a little while for those specific plans to actually come to fruition, if that makes sense.
And if we can add 30 additional kids, I mean, I think was it 14,000-ish, 500 per kid or something that the school gets, roughly, for revenue-wise?
Revenue on a pupil unit is about 10,000.
10,000? Okay, so you get 50 kids, you're looking at $500,000. And so if there's other kids that are going to other districts that are relatively close to us, but we just don't have a school there, there's value add. Hey, I just want to acknowledge, this is super hard, and I appreciate you doing this effort. I mean, there's probably a lot of emotional feedback that you're getting. There's probably maybe not as much logical feedback. I don't know, maybe so. But there's a balance that we've got to, that you guys are trying to juggle, and I appreciate that. I think for me, if we can get a kid to a school without having to drive past a school to get to their school would be make sense. Having full elementary schools that can feed into a middle school makes sense, and then obviously with middle schools feeding into a high school. I mean, that would be obviously the ideal state, but you guys have a tough task, and I appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, and if I could just make one comment, we are not changing our high school boundaries. That is not on the table. I know there's a lot of concern about that. There's complexity in all of this process, but when you talk about high schools in particular, there are a lot of things that go along with that, more than what we're dealing with at the elementary or the middle level. So we are not changing our high school boundaries at this time.
And I'll tell you, the design team talked about it, because they're like, hey, do we just, if we're gonna draw these boundaries, do we tackle all these things? And we're like, we're like, that's probably not a great idea
touch
to
that
do
till we have
because,
to.
because it really impacts a lot of things from athletics to
Lakeville United campus.
other fine arts.
Yeah, I know you wanna think about it.
Thank you for sharing that, because it does not touch high school.
Well, thank you.
And I have to say, that was one of the easiest boundaries we ever did. We sat down, we said, well, let's just go down 50 and see what that does, and the numbers worked. And it was like, I'm not kidding, it was like
And that
our
was
first shot.
2010?
It was our first shot at it, we're like, and they've just held it.
We wish it
true.
was that easy today.
I know, it was unbelievable. We would have never thought that a high school boundary change would be that easy, or addition, but yeah, it was. So,
So what I heard, just to wrap up, is that as soon as we can get you the information from design team and from the input in front of the 20th meeting, to put together, give you basically the gist of what the facilities group has put together, so you'll have that information as well, or the two big asks that I heard from this. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And I've asked him to share the PowerPoint with you, so she'll get that to you either tonight or tomorrow.
Thank you. All right, do we have any other further questions or comments? Okay, so it sounds like we have a pretty good plan moving forward. Our next working session will be February 20th, and our regular board meeting will be on the 27th. Thank you all for listening tonight, and we'll put this meeting to a close.